Hi, this is Graham Helfrich, Technical Advisor Manager for the Engineering Software here at IHS Markit. Welcome to the weekly Did You Know episode, where we learn how to do something of value that you probably didn't know about your IHS Markit engineering software. Today's topic is about well spacing and field development planning in a conventional reservoir. Now, specifically, what we're going to talk about is a case study where we have a green field where we have different drilling options, how many wells we may want to drill. And so we're going to answer questions like how many wells should we drill? Are the wells going to communicate with each other within the reservoir? And finally, what does a cash flow forecast look like for these different well spacing scenarios? Now, normally this would take some very complicated and expensive software, but I'm going to show you how quickly and easily you can do this in Harmony Enterprise. You're not going to believe how fast it is. So I'm just going to make a blank project here. Normally I may have some of this work done in advance, but I really want to prove to you how you can do this from scratch in Harmony Enterprise. Okay, first thing we're going to do is bring in a shape file from a geologist that kind of describes some of the contours of the reservoir boundaries here. Okay. Next, we're going to drop our wells where we are considering drilling them here. So everything here has a latitude and longitude, so you could import these, but I'm just going to draw them on the screen here. So here's one potential location, uh, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so these are kind of the locations I'm considering drilling. I may do one of them, I may do all of them. This is what we're going to investigate. Now I've just really quickly renamed these wells to wells 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to keep track of them. All right, so next we are going to grab these wells and put them down in a group, and we're going to do a group level analysis. Here we're going to use the reservoir module, do a multi-phase multi-well model, conventional. All right, so I see my 5 wells there based on the locations, and the first thing I want to do is kind of define my drainage area based on that shapefile that we brought in. So I'm going to just basically trace this reservoir boundary to honor that shapefile, and then that should give me a more realistic kind of reservoir boundary. One thing that's neat to do as you're watching this is the drainage area is constantly being updated as we draw and define the boundaries here. So this is, again, something you may get from your geologist. Okay, great. So now we need to turn on whatever fluids we want in the reservoir. So I'm going to have gas and water. And I'm going to put my initial pressure in of 3,000 pounds. Now, a quick trick for the formation compressibility is we have to temporarily jump over to this editor's page. We can type in the temperature, the porosity, which is 15%, and that'll give us our formation compressibility. So now we can go back to our model, and we can grab this number here. So that's how we get our formation compressibility. And I should mention over in the editors, this is also where we can input our fluid properties, our gas gravity, our oil properties, any PVT data we have, geomechanical effects, adsorption, relative permeability curves, etc. Basically the fluid properties and rock properties. So back in our model, now we need to start assigning things like permeability, skin, net pay, things like that. So I've got my well number 1 picked here. I'm going to put my 20 millidarcies in. My skin will be 0. My net pay is going to be 80 feet. If you prefer metric, we always have this ruler here. Our porosity is going to be, again, 15% like we said, and our gas saturation will be 80%. Okay, so that is well number 1, and we are able to define unique properties, any of these inputs, a unique set of these inputs for each well. So you can have changing permeability, changing net pay, changing porosity through the reservoir, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to apply these properties to each of the wells. So it'll be kind of a homogeneous reservoir. So to do that, we're going to toggle over to the next well, and we are going to apply the well 1 properties to this well number 2. We'll toggle over to well 3. We will apply properties from well 1 into well 3. So this is basically kind of like a way to clone the perm and skin from one well into the next. Okay, great. So in this case, I need to, of course, assign a bottom hole flowing pressure. We're almost ready to do a forecast here, actually. So in this case, I want to do a 10-year forecast, and I want to flow all these wells at a bottom hole pressure of 500 pounds. As you may know, you can have different forecast constraints, like a fixed rate, or in this case, I'm having a fixed bottom hole flowing pressure for each of the wells. All right, let's forecast. It's done. It just did a 10-year forecast that quickly. Let's kind of see what the heck is going on here, though. So this black line will let me move time back and forth. And so initially we have 3,000 pounds everywhere. When I move ahead, all the wells kind of begin production at their 500-pound drawdown, and we can see how the pressure is changing in the reservoir. We can also look at our gas saturation through time, water saturation, etc. We're seeing the individual well number 5, its forecast here, and we're seeing the total reservoir or total pool rate here. But let's think back what we're trying to do. We want to consider drilling one well versus 2 versus 3. So I'm going to call this my one well scenario. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to disable all these wells except for well 1 for this particular scenario. Okay, so now I can see in my map only well number 1 remains red, so it's active. So I'm going to forecast with only this well, and these other wells basically are not going to produce anything. Okay, so our forecast is done. We can go see, this is the single well forecast. We can go back in time and see initially we're seeing this well's producing. It is the only well that's depleting the reservoir. So this is a scenario. A bit of a trick is I want to copy this forecast for all my other scenarios. So I'm going to add a new model. This will be my 2 well scenario. And we can save time. All we have to do is say group analysis. I want this to basically be a total carbon copy. So now I've saved all that time. I don't have to re-enter anything. All I'm going to do is I'm going to allow well number 2 to be included. So it becomes red. And I'm going to rename this 2 well forecast. And last thing I have to do is assign my forecast constraints, in this case my bottom hole flowing pressure of 500 pounds, and we will click forecast. Okay, so now I have 2 wells producing. It's done. So just another mention here is we can see these well regions. These dashed lines are where we could control what the permeability or net pay or porosity is between each well. That's where these boundaries, not flow boundaries, but just reservoir property boundaries. That's how they can be visualized here. So the pressure will move through this. And then the grid cells, the gridding is set up automatically for us here. If we want to see that, we can turn it on. Okay, so now we're going to keep going. In fact, so I'm going to go all the way up to a 5 well scenario. So far I've done forecasting with 1 well, with 2 wells, and I'm going to do the work and just get all 5 wells set up. Okay, So let's compare these. So I'm going to go make a new worksheet using the forecast module. I'm going to do a rate time plot. And I'm going to turn on each of the forecasts from 1 well all the way up to 5 wells. Okay, so something that's not a big surprise is when we only, sorry, by the way, we're looking at the total forecast from the reservoir or pool. So if we only have 1 well, we have the lowest total rate, but we can kind of maintain that longer, right? In contrast, if we drill 5 wells, we have the highest initial rate, deplete the reservoir more quickly, all right? What if we look at this on a cumulative versus time plot? I'll get the rates out of the way. We see that when it comes to the 10-year cum or EUR, we're pretty much have the same number, same result, whether we have 2, 3, 4, or 5 wells. It's really just a matter of accelerating that production. And that's where the economics will come in with the time value of money. It's only the 1 well scenario where we actually have a lower EUR for the reservoir after 10 years. So that's good to visualize here. So next, let's go ahead and generate some of these economic results. So we're basically going to add a case. We can call it our 1 well case, and we can pick a discount rate. We can enter, we can pick the forecast that we want to associate from which reservoir model to this scenario, and we can put in the price of our hydrocarbons. You can put in a price deck if you want. We can put in our capital expenses for drilling, for completing. We can have multiple capital expenses through time. We can have operating costs to operate the well monthly or dispose of water. We can have very basic taxes and royalties, and you can enter a working interest. So the purpose of this is not to replace a full reserves economics package. This is just a nice simple way within Harmony Enterprise to do some quick economics. I might call them project economics to save yourself some time. So just to fast forward, I've finished entering some of my basic economic parameters, and we're actually looking at the results here now. So what we're seeing is my discounted cash flow with these lines here, and then at the bottom I can see some of the results like net present value and time to payout. So with our 1 well scenario, of course we have the lowest initial cost. We're just drilling 1 well, and we can see that it takes a while, but we get to this net present value over here, and we pay out after 18 months. In comparison, when we drill 2 wells, this seems to be a bit better in terms of our return, and we get an earlier payout. We get a higher net present value. The rest of the cases, the 3 well scenario is actually pretty close to drilling 1 well in terms of NPV, but the profile of when we will get payout and what the shape of that cash flow is very different between 1 and 3 wells, even though the ultimate NPV is similar. For drilling 4 wells or drilling 5 wells, we're kind of on the decline. This is just because of the operating costs for more wells is depleting our profits. And so again, something you can do very quickly, and this all comes from the numerical reservoir model. You can export these very easily into a table if you want to do anything else with them. Now, something else I want to really quickly show you is what if we want to consider bringing these wells online at different times. In this case, I just assume they all begin at the same time. So we're going to go ahead and make another model. I'm going to copy my 5 well case where all 5 wells are going to produce. And the way we really control this is in the forecast page here. So I'm going to just click my down arrow, and I'm going to make 5 rows. That's because I want 5 kind of changes in time as these wells will come on. So why don't we make it so that the wells begin production 12 months apart? So we still have a 10-year forecast. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying well number 1, I want it to begin right away, and I want it to produce for 12 months at a bottom hole pressure. But the other wells, I actually don't want them to uh, to flow or to produce. So I'm basically going to make their gas rate 0. I'm going to do that for each of the wells that I don't want to produce initially. So I'm kind of forcing them to remain inactive. Okay, and really for the well number one, I want it to always produce at a bottom hole pressure of 500 pounds through its entire 10-year life. But I want well number two to come online after 12 months. So I'm going to allow it to do that. So really there's just one 12-month period where well number two will be waiting, but the other wells will continue waiting their turn to come online. In fact, I can just do a little more prep work here. I'm going to kind of make like a tiered system. Okay. So really what I'm doing is I'm making well number 5 for 48 months not produce anything, not come online, but then after 48 months it will start producing. So this is how you can tier well start times. So let's go ahead and run this forecast. Okay, and what's really nice to see is the total rate coming out of this reservoir begins with one well, then the second well starts, then the third well, then the fourth well, and then the fifth well. And then what's really neat is the fifth well, the increment is pretty small when it comes online, and that's because our average reservoir pressure in the blue line, it starts at 3,000 pounds, but it's all the way down to 700 pounds after 4 years. So it's all making sense. Again, we could look at the economics. Okay, so we'll just add a 5-well case like this. We'll call this our delayed drilling. We will pick our forecast as the one, I didn't rename it, but this is the forecast. And so in this case, this is not going to be very economical. I think part of the reason is I put a very high discount rate in this. So in this case, it benefits us to extract the gas very quickly. But again, you can do your own sensitivities on this with either reservoir production times when the wells will come online and various economic inputs. And one of the questions that comes up is, well, can't I just do this with decline analysis? So just to show the importance of how the wells are going to interact with each other and how a well's decline in performance will be very influenced by whether other wells are also producing from that same pool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take well number 1. That's going to be our well that we're going to focus on. And all I'm going to do is say, what does a forecast look like from this well if it's the only well producing compared to if other wells are also producing from the pool. So well number 1, this is a scenario where it is the only well producing in the pool. We're going to copy it. We're going to go to our comparison plot. I'll click paste. And I think I'll do the same thing with the cum, like that. Copy, paste. Okay, so this is the rate and cum for well number 1 if it's the only well in the pool. Next, we're going to go to the kind of the polar opposite where we have 5 wells producing from the pool. We're still going to toggle to well number 1 and take its specific and unique forecast from the model. So copy this, go to results, click paste. Okay, so it's really dramatic. This is the upper forecast is if it's the only well producing, or the same well if there are a total of 5 wells sharing production from the pool. Let's look at the cum. Okay, so this well will cum either 16 or 17 BCF or 80 BCF, depending if it's the only well in the pool or if it's sharing production with other wells. So this is again what the multi-well numerical model will predict for us, and this is why decline analysis would not work in a scenario like this. Well, hopefully now, after seeing what I've shown you, you feel inspired that you can tackle these sorts of well spacing evaluations. But I want to highlight a few other possibilities I'm not going to demonstrate here, but this works for oil or gas. So I showed gas, but this numerical model will handle oil. So when you drop below the bubble point, the solution gas will help and start contributing as well. Later this year, we're going to be adding volatile oil and then also gas condensate to predict when the liquids will drop out from the gas. This works for vertical or horizontal wells. So this is really handy if you have maybe some vertical wells and you're considering, what if I were to drill a horizontal well? This works with heterogeneous reservoir properties. So you can have changing perm, changing net pay, changing porosity, changing saturations. So if you do have that information from something like geologists, then you can certainly apply it in this model as well. Pressure support. So pressure support is available either in terms of like an aquifer, or it can also be injecting water. So check out video number 10 to see an example of this. And if you have production history, you can use it. So you can use this multi-well model to history match and tune your estimates of permeability, skin, area, etc. Okay, so what does this really mean for you today? Well, I wanted to really prove to you that evaluating well spacing with a numerical model is possible. It can be done in a practical and easy way like I showed you here. And all these different sensitivities for well timing, permeability, position to each other, it's all possible in Harmony Enterprise like I showed you. Now, I know typically to do what I've showed you would cost a lot. You'd have to get a very expensive simulator and you'd have to spend days setting it up just to run. But I've shown you here how you can actually do this in a reasonable amount of time. Secondly is getting these results into an economic result, the cash flow, net present value. This is important, and you can do that within Harmony Enterprise without having to pass data around. Ultimately, if you want to do more complex, more rigorous economics, no problem, just export the forecasts to your other program. And that's it. I want to thank you for your time. If you have any questions, please reach out and contact me. And in fact, I'll even send anyone who wants, I can send you this shapefile that I use, so you're welcome to recreate this in your own Harmony Enterprise software. Thank you.